Thank you for allowing us back into your ear orifices. Today we're discussing the philosophy of technology. We do have Daniel, who is a tech entrepreneur and an anarcho-capitalist, a very, very savvy tech businessman here. Thank you, Daniel, for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, are you Swedish? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, Swedish, but currently residing in Eastern Europe. And we also have Brett Stevens, Sodomizer from America.org, deathmetal.org, the author of Nihilism, also into the old school internet. He was around with the anus.com before anus was anus. He has a big history with the early nascent era of the internet, and I believe at one point in time he did a little bit of hacking back in the 90s, but he's clean cut now. He's a very, very upright, standing citizen of America. Thank you, Brett, for joining.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. So, Daniel, one of your questions you wanted to delve into is, are we getting more stupid? Is the reliance on technology actually a barrier to progress in the long term? I think humanity's always had like an element of stupidity that's, just natural bell curve. But is technology making us more lazy in that regard? Not like I saw this article on the Wall Street Journal a few days ago, and the title of it was AI. Excessive reliance on AI could spawn a generation of brainless young people unequipped for the jobs of the future because they have never learned to think critically. Do you think that's the case? Like young people are just fucked in that aspect because they rely too much on AI? I'm sorry, Daniel.
What inspired this question is that some things I do is I try to teach people, and usually they are between age 20 to 40, something like that. And what I've seen in the last couple of years is AI use just exploding, and that's not the only problem. So some students, not all, obviously, some come to me and they say they are very, very sad, they are very, very stressed, and I ask them why, and they say that first of all they are so addicted to social media that it's very, very difficult for them to focus and learn something because they need to check all the updates and everything. And what pains me is that they are aware of it, but yet there they are, and they seem to be unable to break this habit. And the second thing, which is, really started to become a strong trend the past year and a half, something like that, is that they no longer do their assignments. And this, of course, goes for the probably worst third, I would say. So what they do is they take an assignment, they enter it into an AI bot of your choice, and then they take the response and they give it to me and my colleagues. And it is so simple because you get 10 assignments, and down to the variable names, they are exactly identical. And then when you try to challenge them, instead of, having the thought that maybe I'm just cheating myself because I'm not learning anything, they try to find all these technicalities in the law and the school policy to try and get around it. And I always feel, if they would put that time and energy and skill into actually learning, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. So that's why I'm starting to wonder if AI and social media and everything like that is sort of kind of like a stupidity accelerator. And then further on, I wonder, is this like a local minimum of intelligence where we will rebound, where the human organism will develop some kind of immune reaction towards this? Or if not, will we enter the future of idiocracy? So that's where I come from when it comes to this question.
Right. Just to kind of chime in here before Brett, I think, cheating has always happened in the universities, but now it's just exploded with AI. Just, I know from being a grad student right now, I hear the professors talk about how their undergrads are, and a lot of undergrads, they spew out AI responses and all that on their assignments. And one professor made them do a handwritten assignment, and someone just wrote down what AI told them. It was like AI, but someone manually wrote it down on a piece of paper. And I've also heard of some students, they'll try to get past like the AI detectors, because we do have AI detectors that are really efficient too at spotting when something's AI on an assignment that's submitted. And they'll try to bypass that, or try by feeding one response into a different AI system, and then what that spews out into a different AI chatbot or whatever. And, just to kind of conceal that it's AI, but it's still being caught. But there's definitely a shift happening where AI is here. So with that, we have to really consider, it's like, can we use it as a tool? Like, how do we foster actual learning in the university with AI being so prevalent? And it's a big discussion going on right now. Mr. Stevens, do you think AI is making us retarded?
No, I think we made ourselves retarded, and we do a really good job of it. But I think what you're seeing with AI is that the students who previously were using study guides are now simply using AI as a study guide. And what's happened in education that I've seen is that the competition for the top 1% of grades has radically accelerated, because most students now are able to fake their way through a reasonable approximation of the coursework, using study guides, using AI, talking to each other, having study groups. There's probably a million ways that they can boost their scores. But what this has done is basically forced teachers to pick the 2 or 3 students in every class who are going somewhere and give them the highest grades, or give them some other kind of distinction that they get moved on to the next level, which is sort of part of the general dumbing down of education in general. We're sending way too many people through college. We're probably sending too many people through middle school and high school as well. And now we've got all these people churned out into the workforce who have the same degrees, a reasonable approximation of the same grades, and yet are not very competent. And so they're not having job success, which has occurred because we have inverted the process of education. Education used to be kind of a filter. It would promote some and keep everyone else back. And that was when a college degree actually had some value. Now that almost everyone and their dog has a college degree has no value. And since most of them also have graduate degrees of some kind, those are losing value. So I think that there's going to be a shift to practical testing, which will be great, because I think a lot of this will distinguish between the people who've gone through and used some kind of aids or followed the procedure or whatever it would be, and those who can actually think a little bit. And, you mentioned one of my favorite ways of doing the separation, which is the written test. If you come in to take a final and you've got a pen and a piece of paper, you're facing an entirely different challenge than if you have a computer, if you have your study guides, open book, whatever. And I think this is a great way to really separate the sheep from the goats, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, not to shit on some of my fellow students in grad school, but I've
you
seen...
can say fertilize.
To fertilize, yeah. But I've seen some grad students who can't even spell. And I'm like, how the fuck did you get into grad school? You can't even fucking spell, but they use fucking computers and spell check and all that. And it's really, really disheartening, especially when, we're competing. And I know that, some students, they shouldn't be competing, but it is really a sad state of affair. But on the other spectrum, like there's a lot of AI optimism where some people actually believe this, that with like a Neuralink and all that, where AI is going to merge with the human brain and we're going to reach some singularity and it's going to be our next step in evolution. I think that's total fucking hogwash. Do you think that's going to be just a fad and this scientific circles that's going to fade out over time, Mr. Stevens, like the merging with machines and becoming like a superhuman?
I think there's going to be a feedback loop between machines and humans are going to adapt to the machines just as the machines are adapting to us. This may make people be a little more precise in what they do because the machines obviously have no problem being precise. As far as all the utopian stuff, I think it joins the rest of the utopian stuff in the trash heap because nothing fundamentally changes about humanity. And AI is very limited in what it can do. It's a statistical prediction engine that cannot actually think on its own. It can do some comparisons, it can do some analysis as a result, but basically you're not talking about something that can replace the human brain. What it can help you with is the mechanics. And I think we're going to see that everywhere. And, it's sort of like universal education. Now everybody, except that one student, uses roughly the same spellings and the same grammar on what they write. And so we can communicate more effectively. It's going to be an intensification of that. But there will be a feedback loop between humans and machines, and it's going to change our thinking, whether we implant it or not. In my view, the brain implants, the neural modem that everybody wants us to have, that's some years away. And so we're going to have some time here now where we're going to be interacting with an AI world that's basically not super bright, but can help us with the mechanics. And I think that's going to refine us in a feedback loop, us reacting to it as it reacts to us. And we're seeing the downside now, which is obviously that people make themselves mentally crippled by depending on the tool. But I think the upside is that people are going to start to have slightly more disciplined thinking because they're going to be accustomed to how AI does things. And where that's going to go is hard to predict, but my general guess is that it's going to de-emphasize form in interaction a bit, and we're going to slowly see a need for people to actually contribute content that's distinctive. We're already seeing the cutting edge of this in that I think AI is starting to kill off the influencers because it's easy to have an AI generate the kind of cheeky stuff that they do. Sort of paradigm busting, sardonic, and or provocative stuff that they like to do. And so it's entirely possible that we're going to have to go into a more sober age where, in light of how much AI content is out there, people are going to look toward a different type of content for what they value.
Yeah, and you see this with AI art. Like, there's a great filter that AI has. I think I am a little optimistic in this regard that you look at AI art when that came out and everyone was generating images, it pissed off a lot of artists, but the types of artists that it actually pissed off were the shitty artists that looked like they went to prison and learned art there, just sketching in their free time in prison. Just you can tell it's not really refined or very exceptional. They're the ones who got all pissed off about AI art.
But I have to wonder, why are they pissed off? Because at the end of the day, don't they do art because they enjoy doing and producing art? If they are pissed off because a computer produces art which might lower the price of art, maybe they are into art as a business, and then they'd better just upgrade their tools and processes if that is the reason for being in art. But I mean, for me, art is ultimately subjective. So just the fact that you will have a human being who does something, that will provide a lot of value for people who appreciate that kind of art. So I really don't understand all these artists who are shaking their fists at AI.
Oh, there were a lot. And the thing about that, too, is the actual good artists, the people who, they're on their feet, they do a lot of commissions. They don't give a shit about AI art. They actually use it as a tool. But the shitty artists, the ones who, may struggle to, get commissioned, they're the ones who are really vocal about AI art. And I think the same thing is going to be happening with metal, because now there's AI generated music and there's AI generated metal. Granted, it's very, very obvious to tell it's fake. It's AI generated. It's just, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like actual instruments. But as that technology becomes more advanced, it's going to start sounding like the vast majority of metal, essentially. And that's going to be a filter as well, I believe, where you receive a promo in your inbox, and it's like, this just sounds like AI metal, because AI just learns the the typical flavors of, the vast majority of bands, and a lot of bands don't really have their own voices. They're aping each other and specific styles, and AI is going to pick up on that just like it has with art. And I believe it's going to be a filter. Like 90% of bands may just disappear. Do you agree with that, Mr. Stevens?
I really hope it's going to be true. I think at this point, the democratization of art has, more than AI ever could, created a sameness to everything and a low quality to everything, because it's all rushed out the door just to take a place in sort of like a market queue. I think that's already wrecked so much. It would be great if AI took out all of these people, because they're fundamentally not contributing anything anyway.
Yeah. I really hope that's the result of AI-generated music, where it just destroys the music scene, and what's left are people who actually have something to contribute, something honest, something that is, very expressive and unique, rather than just aping specific styles. Granted, there's art to crafting good metal that could be really influenced by, like, you look at Morbid Angel taking, thrash metal to the logical extreme. And that's very commendable what they did, and a lot of bands afterwards, like the Sinister is a good example, where they kind of had the same kind of approach, but it wasn't as far as Morbid Angel, but the influences are very much apparent in their songcrafts. I'm very hopeful that AI music will sodomize the underground, but. In this regard, as another one of Daniel's questions, is AI or technology in general inherently neutral? I think I echo Jacques Ellul, who influenced Ted Kaczynski in the book The Technological Society. He says that technology or technological progress is its own kind of thing. Like whatever's the most efficient will reign supreme no matter what. And with that sentiment, he views that it has its own internal, like, non-human logic, where whatever's the most efficient is preferable. And with that, we don't really have control over technology. It's just efficiency itself. The worship of efficiency is what is driving everything along. And with that, you look at like how the atomic bomb, the most efficient use, the quickest, roll it out is to, use atomic energy to be a weapon rather than, helping society at large. It was just boom, there's the technology, let's throw it out there, and big boom. And then later we started harnessing atomic energy for productive uses. But for Jacques Ellul, we're fucked. Technology is just going to keep progressing, and we're not going to have control over it. And I do view that, there's definitely that element in technological progress itself. Obviously, it greatly influenced Ted Kaczynski, and we all know what happened there. Do you want to jump into Uncle Ted, Mr. Stevens?
Uncle Ted, well, there's so much to like about Uncle Ted. He really understood the nature of the leftist. He understood their psychology. I think he had a very fine understanding of how consumer society worked. But in the long run, I disagree with Uncle Ted. I think we're scapegoating technology for what ultimately are the failures of social organization. We've lost sight of any kind of goal. And this ties into your point, which is that technology becomes a goal in itself simply because it's more efficient. But in that way, is it really any different than any other method? I mean, the technology that has helped us decay here may be agriculture. It may be tens of thousands of years old. So I'm not super worried about technological change destroying society. I'm worried about the fact that human groups tend to destroy themselves, and the technology makes it easier for them to delay consequences coming back from reality. For example, if you were living in the wilds thousands of years ago. You had to get your crops planted, you had to get your mammoth hunted, your meat cured in time for winter, or you were going to starve to death and die. Well, now, if you accidentally forget to kill your mammoth and cure the meat, you just haul out a credit card and buy all the stuff on credit, and you could be fine for decades. You know, you're left free of all the mess of survival. Darwinism has been held back by technology. And I think that's most of what people are riffing on with this sort of thing. You know, there's fear of technology, but in the end, it's no different than any other learning that we have or any other market efficiency.
I agree. My problem with this fear of technology is that it's not really about the technology, because if we just as a thought experiment imagine that all humans are gone tomorrow, then nothing matters at all. So for me, the problem is the human mind. Or potentially, as Brett is saying, when minds come together, human groups, and that is ultimately what determines what technology we develop and what technology we use and how we use it. So for me, technology is a tool, an extremely powerful tool, and being such, it can reinforce good values, good desires, and bad values and bad desires. So it can allow us to achieve good things a lot quicker and a lot of bad things a lot quicker. So people ask me, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And I usually say in the short term, and with the short term I mean, you know, the next 10 to 40 years, something like that, I'm a pessimist. In the long term, I'm an optimist, because my argument here is that we had the capability of destroying the planet many times over since the last 70 years. And despite all politicians in power with the keys to these nuclear bombs, we managed not to destroy ourselves. So that's where I am. So I do agree with some things, but that it's technology in itself, this I do not agree with.
Yeah, so when quantum computing became like this big thing where, they can crack passwords and encryptions and all that super quick, that would take thousands of years with regular computers. Quantum computing itself is neither good or bad, but in the wrong hands, it could be bad, where people hack into banks and destroy, our cyber infrastructure and all that. Same thing with AI. AI could be used, for good or bad purposes. So it really depends on the person, like you guys were saying, that's harnessing that technology. And a lot of people, like we were kind of discussing this, they don't think that deeply about the technology that they're using. It's just, they just kind of use it in their, like, the background of, their daily lives. They listen to Spotify or use, AI to cheat or whatnot. And with it, I don't think they are really like helping to propel the technology forward rather than just consuming, which I think that kind of gets into another question you had about, is it like a technology, a hedonistic trap, where you have like a hedonistic virtual worlds? I think what you're referring to in that regard is like the metaverse or whatever. You go and put on their goggles and you're in this other reality, and or this neural link. Let's say you stimulate your brain directly, so no goggles necessary at all. You just buy the experience that you want. This is a classic philosophical problem that is used to challenge, hedonism or ethical hedonism. So I think, with the wrong values, maybe that's why there's no intelligent life in the universe, because when they reached a certain level of technological improvement, they all got stuck in their own private hedonistic worlds. Yeah, I'm unsure about that, because I think we are at a quote-unquote different stage in our evolution, just by society at large and how we live in our environments, because it's different than, being hunter-gatherers. And like I said on the previous episode, I believe the reasons why our brains are so large is because we started using tools, and those tools started becoming more complex, and then we had social structures and all that requires adaptation. And I feel that even now we're still adapting, especially when technology is progressing unrestrained, essentially, because everyone's trying to move to the next better thing constantly. It's a constant race for the most efficient, the next breakthrough, and all that. We have to adapt to that in the aftermath of technological breakthroughs. It's always this constant stream of adaptation, and I think that in itself could also. Now, a lot of people are going to be lazy, and they're going to use it for hedonistic reasons, but there's still going to be the people creating the technologies, the people like truly adapting to it. And I think that possibly we could, end up becoming smarter just from the sheer adaptation of more and more complex structures. However, if we become lazy, we could become dumber. So it's kind of like Brave New World there, where it could be. I know Brett's a huge fan of Huxley, but you could just have like a hedonistic upper class, and the lower classes, they're all out in the wilderness. You want to add on to that, Mr. Stevens?
I think even more than Huxley, the writer on point here is Ray Bradbury, because if you read it beyond a high school level, Fahrenheit 451, and even more important, The Martian Chronicles, these are books about how the pursuit of pleasure leads humanity into illusion, and thus they become basically self-destructive. I mean, in Fahrenheit 451, the real problem is people are threatened by books. They're threatened by the knowledge of the past, and they'd rather have it all be burned down for their own safety. That's how they view it. And so when we look at technology, Huxley gave us one view, which is that the pursuit of pleasure will create this kind of utopia dystopia where everyone's sort of happy but empty. And then there's Bradbury's view, which is that it's actually threatening, that technology allows people to flee from reality in their everyday lives. And as a result, they become empty and horrible, sort of like people under communism. I think this is a risk, but I would say that humanity is inseparable from technology. We evolved through it. We evolved with it. It's part of our intellectual makeup. So what I think people are seeing more, and he really hits on this, Bradbury hits on this in The Martian Chronicles, is that the individual giving into weakness will find others in the group doing the same thing. And so the group forms an aggregate based on the lowest common denominator behaviors of humanity, which tend to be pretty gross. And those tear down everything good, and technology can't stop that, which I think is sort of the more challenging question here, which is like, you can't make people smarter. What you can do is make them more disciplined, or give them some background knowledge so they get a sort of their starting point is further along otherwise. But the thing is that if they then choose to deviate from that because it's easier, there's not much you can do about that. The self-destruction has already kicked in. So I think that what we're dealing with here, rather than technology making us dumber, is probably just that we dumb ourselves down through a process that is much older than high technology. It's just a weakness in humanity. And I know that there was some research that came out this week that suggested that, though it's a very small leap, that people who played a lot of video games instead of watching TVs and movies scored a little bit better on IQ tests. And I would say that's mostly reaction time and possibly familiarity with spatial reasoning that's caused that, increased familiarity with spatial reasoning. But I don't think it's going to raise our IQ. The only thing that really raises IQ consistently over time is breeding for it. And maybe technology will, sort of hinting at your point about the many subsistence farmers surrounding a few technological cities, maybe technology will impose this great filter on humanity. And this could be beneficial to us because we could breed ourselves into highly proficient technological beings who are ready to explore the stars, and leave everybody else at a level that really works for them, which is, subsistence farming and, homebrewed beer.
Well, what's interesting there is to perhaps tie this into the current global, more or less, fertility crisis. Now, I believe it's a multidimensional problem. You have chemicals, pollution, but you also have the values part, the destruction of the traditional family values, and so on and so on. And then you have the hedonistic part, pornography, LLMs, whatever, you know. So adding all of this together leads to less offspring, and so on and so on. But where I'm positive is what you touched on earlier. Maybe some will sort of adapt to all of this and develop kind of antibodies, both to the values, but also when it comes to the technological tools that turned out to be hedonistic traps. Maybe eventually people will develop these ideological antibodies that protect, and the ones that don't, as you say, they fade away over time, and the ones that do will, of course, take these antibodies, be they memes or whatever, and pass that on to their offspring, and on it goes.
You know, that's a good point. We already have a working example in the form of pornography. You know, I think there's been porn available for a long time, but the people I see who are getting anywhere in life aren't spending much time with porn or drugs or, you know, really watching TV in general. I mean, they're out doing things, you know, for most of the time. I mean, maybe they watch TV in the evenings. I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of technological sidesteps that people can take that could be, you know, made easy by technology that allow them to just avoid dealing with life, and they can kind of, you know, zone out and sort of fade away, as you gently said. You know, I think there's a possibility, for example, if I think AI is going to be most influential in automation. I think we're going to see it replacing a whole swath of workers in ways that we don't even anticipate. There's just, with the articulable limbs of the robots we have now, and the general intelligence of the visual perception they have, running their decisions through an AI means that pretty soon we're going to have very durable robot workers, and that's going to replace a lot of people. And I think at that point, you could have a society where there's lots of people who are basically existing on a UBI, watching porn all day and video games, and not existing out in the world and just fading away. And so it's possible that, ironically, socialism and technology could combine forces to be very Darwinistic. It'd be nice if it turned out that way. But, you know, in the big picture, I think every generation worries about how technology will change it, and the changes are always less profound than we think. You know, if you'd showed people 200 years ago a society entirely built around cars, where everybody sits in front of computers all day long instead of, you know, growing crops in the field or hunting or something like that, I think it would blow their minds, and they would sort of consider it, you know, an eighth level of hell. But at the same time, we can see how people sort according to their natural tendencies anyway. If you're wired to be higher IQ and to be purposeful and to care about things that are transcendent or at least intangible, you're going to keep doing that regardless of what technology does. And the aimless people who've got really no direction in life except consuming anyway, well, yeah, they'll take advantage of technology, but they're sort of, you know, they sort of exist as a substrate rather than an agency, and nothing's really going to change that either.
But I like what you say about ironically socialists combined with Darwinism somewhere in the future. That's a very interesting thought, because once enough is automated, that we become wealthy enough where we don't even need the price mechanism and markets, at that point in time, some kind of Star Trek-esque socialism might be possible. And at that time, you basically have two options. Either you learn to create meaning and goals for yourself, and you thrive. And if you cannot do this, I do believe that then you will tend to fade away over time. So that's a very, very interesting thought, actually.
There's been a lot of talk about the UBI, and I always think of it like the California approach to welfare. If you have enough problems in California, mental, physical, behavioral, whatever, they basically farm you out on welfare, because it's cheaper to pay you to stay at home and masturbate than it is to have you out on the street, possibly doing something destructive. And they even extend this. I mean, you legalize drugs.
No, so while we wait for Brett, let me address another thing, and that is technological change. I find it very amusing when I read in the media that everyone is worried about AI and tomorrow we won't have any jobs and so on and so on. And this discussion we've been having countless of times, the past 200, 300 years, who knows? So it was always, the horse drivers, the ice delivery men, cars will be the beginning of the end because people won't have any jobs. And as long as we have human desires, in one way or another, there will always be human jobs. And since the human desires are limitless, basically jobs will always be found. Now, that being said, of course, it will go up and down, so it will not be a smooth curve. Sometimes, there is a recession, sometimes not. So that's another one of those things that I do not believe that will have this enormous problem where tomorrow 90% will be automated. Because looking at myself, what do I use AI for? For me, the rule is the less creative the job, the more I can use AI to solve it. So, for instance, running my own company, develop an environmental plan or a gender plan or all this bullshit that the government requires you to have in order for you to do business with them. That's perfect. I just type, give an AI, give me some, BS gender plan. I have a document so I can check a box, and I know no one will ever read this stupid document. So that's a perfect example of nonsense job that will be automated by AI.
Yeah, we can't actually predict what the workforce will look like in 50 to 100 years. Like, you look at what we are now, we have a lot of office dwellers, and 200 years ago that would be unfathomable that people would be sitting in front of computers. So the character of the work, I think, will be changing. It could be a lot less work. It could be, as technology starts automating a lot of the necessities of our daily lives, it could just be like we're filling out surveys and we're just little serfs for the technocratic system. I don't know. I have no idea what's going to be happening. But it does look like Brett Stevens has dropped from the conversation. Hopefully he does return. But like you were saying too, this discussion is nothing new. Whenever there's been a breakthrough, even with the Industrial Revolution, there's a lot of criticism about it. And even going back to the literature, there's quite a few books were released in the early 20th century, which tackled a lot of the subjects that we're still talking about today. There's this Rosling's Universal Robots by Carl Chapek, I think that's how you pronounce that, where essentially, like Brett was saying, that we end up having robots do most of the jobs and all that, but those robots in the story, they approximate something like human consciousness eventually, even though they're designed to be really dumb, just they naturally start becoming more efficient and smarter, and they end up revolting and killing off all of humanity, I think. And then there's also the Machine Stops, which came out in 1909, where everyone's living in this apocalyptic world underground, and a machine handles everything for them. They don't even have to leave their little pods that they're in. It just, all they do is they kind of FaceTime with each other and give each other lectures while the machine handles everything for them. But eventually the machine breaks down and everybody dies. So there's always there's often a really, really, negative point of view on technology. It could end up just dooming humanity. But they also have The Shape of Things to Come by H.G. Wells, which came out in 1933, And with that, we go through like 150 years of strife and conflict and all that, but eventually we do reach a technocratic utopia. And dissent, though, from the air dictatorship could, result in, killing old dissenters and all that. Or, it's still like Mr. Stevens is saying, a utopia, dystopia. But yeah, these things are not new. These sentiments are not new at all where it comes to looking at technology, how it will really, a lot of people have a lot of pessimism, but especially today, there's a lot of optimism. You look at Elon Musk and all that being like the poster boy for technological progress today. He's he did come out and say that AI is dangerous and all that, but he hasn't been saying that much lately. I think there's a lot of emphasis on technological progress being positive today compared to like the early 20th century, where there was a lot of negative point of views, especially in the philosophical world, where we had quite a few voices. You had Spengler saying that essentially Western civilization is fucked. We sold our souls for technological progress, and now we are soulless beings, and it's just going to, ruin everything. And then you also have like Martin Heidegger, his essay on technology, where technology reduces everything to standing reserves to be exploited, and that process is called enframing. And like that's eye-opening when you read that essay he wrote about technology. Is just interacting with technology itself. There's that enframing aspect, and he even viewed it like people end up being exploited themselves, which is especially true when you look at how we interact with, the internet and social media and email, all that data being collected about us. And even in the workplace, we have human resources, like a resource to, the people who control the human resources of a business or company. It's just this very structured, this very inhumane. It doesn't really grant itself to authentic living. Essentially, it's not not hunter gathering, being at one with nature, and all the awesome aspects of that. Mr. Stevens, you're back. Sorry, you dropped for a second there.
Yeah, sorry about that. We got hit by a slightly weird and intense storm here. Just chipping one thing in here, because I know we do have, well, at least I'm part libertarian and I like a lot of the aspects of that philosophy, but wanted to just say that to some degree, while hunter-gatherer living may be more authentic and all that, I do like Costco. And I think there's certain efficiencies to life and pleasantries to life, and having, hot water, flush toilets, dishwashers, refrigerators, Costco, prepackaged tobacco, all these important things. And so I am, Michelle Houellebecq did a movie called The Kidnapping of Michelle Houellebecq. And in the end of it, hopefully this isn't a spoiler for you guys, he's in a car that he has bought through the money he's gotten from this kidnapping attempt. And he's on the freeway in France. And as the movie ends, he's just accelerating more and more. But the thing that's different with Houellebecq accelerating is he's not just an accelerationist, what is falling push, but I think he's also a futurist who's just like, what, we can't go back to the past. We have to create a good quality new future with meaning in it. And we can do that if we want, but right now we don't have the will. However, his will is to keep pressing that accelerator into the floor. And I think that's sort of my attitude toward technology, which is that I'm not interested in standing aside history screaming stop. I would like to constantly go toward new and exciting things and use technology toward that end. I mean, humans started using technology probably even before we made fire. We started having food that we would collect. We had tools that we would use to collect it. We made weapons. Eventually, we made containers. those old gourds and stuff that people had for carrying water. All of these things made life better. And I don't see any reason why technology itself can't make life better. It's sort of like I always tell people about software. It doesn't matter to me whether it's open source or closed source. It matters who's in charge. A good leader will produce quality software that people can use for generations. A bad leader, even if they've got the absolutely best of intentions and ideology behind them, is going to produce terrible software because they're not thinking about reality and they're not thinking about enhancing reality. And to me, that's the dividing line with technology.
And here,
go ahead.
Here, I think another key is what we discuss so often on Mastodon, and that is the culture and values. And when it comes to technology and choice, as you say, I'm like you. I want more choice. I want more technology, and so on. That, however, does not mean that I have to use all technology. So, for instance, to illustrate this in a very simple way, I like McDonald's. And many Europeans will send hate my way for saying this, but I enjoy it. Maybe once a month, once every 2 months, it's great. I'm busy. I need a quick lunch. I go there, but only because I like it and I eat a hamburger there every once in a while does not mean I have to go there every single day and supersize the meal and eat it constantly and thereby destroying myself. So this, I think, is extremely important when it comes to our technological future. Technology is good, as you say. It made our lives simple. It helped us survive, achieve more, feed more, become healthier, and so on and so on. But that does not mean that you have to engage with every single technology without limit. And that goes back to culture and values. What are these values? What is this culture that will enable us to sort of pick the cherries and discard the things that ultimately might be harmful if used too much, and so on and so on.
If we're speaking of capitalism and McDonald's, you've hit on a really interesting subtopic, which is that in the past 2 years, McDonald's has made radical changes to their menu, and they are doing so in response to market forces. Because McDonald's started out as one of the first and only, really, in a lot of places, fast food joints that people could get food at. Over time, their competition has intensified, not just other fast food, but delivery food. Grocery stores now have pre-prepared food everywhere, so forth and so on. And so they've had to get competitive again. And the last time I was in a McDonald's, you stop on your way to somewhere because you need some food that you think is safe and you don't know any local restaurants or whatever. And the bathrooms are always good and the coffee's always good. I was blown away by how much healthy stuff they had on the menu. Even though they kept some of the old favorites, most of the old favorites, they've also just slowly been working in more real food as time goes on. And I think this is a great example of a market correction. It's like New Coke, that debacle from the 80s, but done the right way.
Yeah, and also I think if you look at the reverse, it's a beautiful explanation of why communism and socialism, where you remove competition, you remove evolution, why it never works. McDonald's had to evolve. If it didn't, it would go out of business or not grow as fast. So another point for evolution.
That's true. I think socialism destroys itself psychologically more than anything else. But the fact that the bureaucracy of any kind is not responsive to what people actually use it for. This is sort of like the hacker dilemma. Hackers repurpose technology for uses that people actually need, even if that's not what the corporate overlords or academic overlords want. And in the same way, markets show people responding with what they need as far as utility, even if it's not necessarily the best food for them. They might need fast food on their way to get something done, and therefore is a lot more responsive to reality than any bureaucracy can be, and it works around the control systems that human groups always implement based on having you sort of do things by the methods they consider right and ignoring what your actual needs are. So I agree there. But I'd just add, I think that the biggest destruction of socialism is the demoralization, and it leaves people as almost total zombies when it's done. It's a very, very dangerous system.
Yeah. Have you guys heard of the IPAT formula? Daniel read IPAT formula, which is, the environmental impact equals what the population is, factored with the affluence of that population, and then also the technological aspects. Because IPAT formula has worked a little bit in the past, where as a more affluent a population becomes, the greener they become, they pollute a lot less. So you look at the third world countries or developing world, they tend to pollute a shit ton. Like you look at India and all that. But over time, as they become more affluent and everyone's living a little bit better, then they start polluting. The trend is they pollute a little bit less, but I think, it doesn't address the issue of overpopulation at all. Where no matter what, if you keep, increasing your numbers, you're just going to start, consuming a lot more, as well as expanding, destroying natural environments, as well as creating a lot more waste.
I haven't heard about that specific thing, but this argument I have read in Johan Norberg. He's a very popular Swedish libertarian. So he wrote a book called The Capitalist Manifesto, and one argument he has there in favor of capitalism and libertarianism is that rich countries can afford to take care of nature, while countries that are not rich, they cannot afford it. They need to focus on surviving this day, the next day, and okay, if the lake becomes polluted, so be it, because I have food on the table. But once you accumulate wealth, then you can start to afford to protect that lake or that forest and so on. And the second thing on a similar theme is Björn Lomborg, this Danish guy who you might have seen from time to time in some international newspapers. And he argues that carbon taxes, political solutions is actually the most wasteful way we can ever imagine of trying to save any nature. It will do more harm than good. So what we should do, according to Björn Lomborg, is to take all of this money that's just wasted today in very inefficient ways of protecting nature and investing that into science and technology with the purpose of improving solar, improving wind, improving battery technology, and so on and so on. And only in this way, with the help of the markets, will we be able to solve our environmental problems. So those are two things which I think of when you mentioned that.
Yeah, great points there. If you look at, like, Trump on the other day on the news was saying that windmills are very wasteful. They're an eyesore. Like they're not good for the environment either. Like the materials that make up windmills are just bad, and plus they kill the birds. But you start thinking about like how we're approaching like green technologies and creating green energy. It's wasteful. Like the fossil fuels you use to even transport a lot of that shit, the materials, the manufacture solar panels or windmills, like you're still using fossil fuels in that regard. And then also when a windmill breaks down, that just creates more pollution. It's, goes to, now I think they handle windmills better, where I think they do break it down a little bit better where it doesn't pollute. But Mr. Stevens, do you have any thoughts on like green technologies being inefficient?
Oh, definitely. I think that over time with technology, it tends to get more efficient, which reduces your environmental impact, which is welcome. Gadgets get smaller, they use less power, they tend to be more precise, that kind of thing. As you learn more about, this is the technology curve. Computers started out being huge rooms that used tons of electricity and generated tons of heat, and now your phone can outperform that. So that's the nature of the technology curve, at least to a point. I think we dick around with a lot of environmental feel-good theater but no one has actually put their finger on what really needs to be done, which is half Earth, which is to leave half of the Earth's land and half of the seas entirely under the domain of nature and just not intervene at all. And that's its own kind of market. Ecosystems are their own kind of little markets where different critters fight for survival, they find niches, and they maintain themselves. And these are necessary in big swaths of land so that these species have space to live, hunt, forage, breed, that kind of thing. And I think that's the only workable environmental solution that's going to stop the ecocide, no matter what goes on. But what we're doing right now, as far as these incredibly expensive environmental ventures, is essentially wasting taxpayer money for good feelings. And over time, we're going to see how destructive this is, because what we could have done with that money would have been a lot more significant. I mean, land is not that expensive if you were able to purchase up enough of it and leave it in its natural state. That lets nature maintain itself, and it does a better job of it than we do, than humans do. So that's ultimately where I go with that. But I would just say over time that people who are technophobes should just realize that over time, technology tends to get more efficient and less destructive. As to whether populations do, I think that's mostly an artifact of what Europeans and Americans do. I don't know if that will apply to the rest of the world. I think it's probably a function of IQ and the awareness of the society that it decides to spend its resources on being a little more efficient. But again, we have to ask how much of that really matters at all. Any society can set aside half of its land and sea for nature, but no one will do it because it means saying no to the dreams of some people. It's not a market force, it's something higher than that. But I think it's what we're going to need to do if we want to keep our natural environment.
Where are we now, Brett? 50% is the goal. And do you know where we are today in percentage-wise?
It's interesting. We actually are not using that much of land for fully developed society. But when you look at land under human control, it's upwards of 75%. It's very hard to measure because, the question is, if you fence in an area, is that under human control? Well, if it's a small area, definitely. And I think that's sort of the big dividing line here. We need to leave big parts of whole ecosystems for critters. We'd have to, kind of like they used to do with the Everglades. I don't know if they still do. They just said that a huge portion of it is a complete no-go zone for human beings. And that's the level of thing we have to do here, is big chunks. But as far as the land that we actually need, I think we're below 50%. There's a lot of land that humans control and intervene in that we could just leave alone.
Yeah, and looking at urbanization, more and more people moving to cities, especially if you look at Sweden, where you have dying villages in the countryside, ghost villages, for instance. If we extrapolate this trend, more and more nature will be available to nature. And I spoke with an architect acquaintance, and she pointed out that actually living in a city in a high-rise where many people share resources and live in a small surface, that's actually the most environmental thing you can do. The least environmental thing you can do is if everyone has their own house, their own drain, their own electricity, and so on and so on.
Might depend on how many people there are. The problem with high-rises is that they don't actually last that long. These buildings require an immense amount of maintenance, and when things go wrong in them, like all the PVC piping starts cracking, you have to do these immense wasteful cleanups. And like they found in Florida with that one condo complex, they didn't maintain it, the whole thing fell down. So the risks are mighty. I would say that a place like Sweden, I'm not really worried about overpopulation there, at least until you get to immigration. You know what I mean? And I think that you could have a society there where everyone had a decent suburban home or farm, small farm, and you'd still be able to make things work. There's other questions about cities, which is how psychologically beneficial they are for people, and I'm very skeptical of that. I think that having too many people in a place and anonymity makes everyone behave like New Yorkers at some point, and that's really a terrifying prospect, because I've never met a more oblivious and self-focused group of people than the people wandering around the streets of New York. I mean, I'm amazed they even stopped to notice 9/11. You know, it's kind of how solipsistic anonymity makes people. But, you know, I mean, I think I don't know terribly much about Sweden, other than, of course, way too much trivia about your death metal, but which is legit, you know. But, you know, it seems to me that the population is high quality, relatively self-maintaining, and until it started bringing in mass immigration and allowing influencers to come over there, everything was pretty hunky-dory as far as the environment. I mean, I think that you're not really at risk there of abusing. What I see closer to home, and so I know more about it, is what's happened here in Texas, which is that everyone is fleeing the high tax areas, and they are moving to lower tax areas where they can afford homes. And so the development, the building of homes, continues in every direction for 100 miles. And there's nothing you can do about it, because the land will be for sale, someone will buy it, and then they will build more. And this also causes the problem we see in American cities, which is that as neighborhoods age, they become disposable. Their value goes down, and pretty soon everyone moves out. The usual decay moves in, and then you have a ghetto instead of a thriving neighborhood. And it's you know, it's easier and cheaper just to build somewhere else than it is to fix things. And there's, you know, some would say that this is a critique of capitalism. I don't think it is, because there's so many market distortions that are making it impossible to say we're actually in a capitalist system, or to say exactly what's influencing this directly. But I think that you know, there's a risk with any kind of development. And when you make cities dense, when you put everyone in a high rise and you have a population concentration, it's possible that you're going to have sort of a mass psychosis that results in a formula for sort of unending growth like this.
This is an interesting question. I lived in 6 countries. I lived in the US, among others, in Chicago, which is a fairly big city, at least by European standards. And for me, this is kind of difficult to tease out what's cultural and what's a mega city issue and so on. So what I tend to notice when I am in the US, for instance, is that on the surface, everything is very, very social and very, very nice and pleasant, but it's very, very difficult to sort of get beneath the surface of an American. And if that's an American in New York or Chicago versus the American countryside, I don't know. I suspect it might be. But if I look at Sweden, for instance, which, you know, the population of Chicago, you basically fit in one state. It's a very, very small country. Going back 50, 60, 70 years, the Swedish gold was the trust in society. So when my father grew up, they didn't lock the door to the apartment, because why would anyone enter a private apartment? You know, obviously today that those days are gone due to immigration and the resulting increase in crime and everything. However, that goes back to what you said. Is it a critique about capitalism? Because all today's immigration issues would, I believe, naturally go away if you allowed it on a capitalist basis. That is, you're free to move, but no one will pay anything for you. Then your focus, instead of moving to the country where you get the most for free, your focus becomes moving to a community where you can contribute something. And in return, you get money or food and whatever. And I think from an environmental environmental point of view, that's a much healthier mindset. I move somewhere where I can contribute and become a valued member of society rather than moving somewhere where I get the most money from the government. That is really what drives a lot of unnecessary consumption and creates these perverse deals where it's cheaper to build a new house than restore an old one.
Speaking of perverse, we often call that perverse incentives, meaning that you've got attractors for your actions and your spending of money that reward what's destructive instead of what's positive. And this, to me, is the split between capitalism and socialism. Capitalism is supply side. It rewards producers, creators, and maintainers. Socialism is demand side. It rewards people who come up with reasons why they're victims and deserve more money from government. And that becomes destructive in the long term. So, yeah, I think it's very hard to separate our current situation from our mixed economic system, which is half socialist and half capitalist, because we have so many rules in place, so many subsidies, that what we're seeing is not actually markets. I even argue that consumerism is the result of having government subsidies, starting with Social Security. In America now, with government retirement benefits, you don't worry about saving any part of your paycheck. You spend everything you have because government takes care of your retirement instead of you having to save for it. And this produces a totally disposable mentality where you're just going to spend money willy-nilly on stuff because you can, because you've got nothing else to do with it and you don't have any concerns. And this has created a really gross consumer culture where people are buying all sorts of random stuff that they didn't need, that would later clog landfills, just because there's no incentive to them to save money. And in the same way, when the money comes to you free, you have no incentive to spend it well because it just shows up magically, you waste it, and then next month more shows up. And so you just see people tossing it into the abyss, essentially. But, it's in the longer term, I think that there is a capitalist case for half Earth, which is simply that you're securing a resource that we need. We all like having oxygen. Well, at what point does the market consider oxygen? And I don't think it can, except at the highest level. This is the kind of decision a king can make, but a society run by committee cannot. So we're headed toward interesting times with that, because I think that as the ecocide progresses, people are starting to take this more seriously. The globalists fobbed us off with climate change for a while, but I think even to your average person now, it's pretty obvious that that's a gross oversimplification. So we're probably headed into different times of environmentalism where people are going to consider things like maybe we should just have a few 100,000 acres near us that is permanently undeveloped. Could be interesting.
I think the key is to solving environmental problem is doing it with a win-win mindset. Because as long as the current leaders propose that we go back to medieval times, nothing will change. There will be a revolution if they start to implement policies like that. So this is something that, values is one thing, working with people. But if I value the environment, then I change my behavior. Another thing, I think it was a great argument what you said about actually that the opposite of capitalism, free money, is what's driving a lot of environmental damage. I think that's another beautiful argument that I haven't heard before. So yeah.
It's true. I think that having people be accountable to themselves for their own spending makes them want to value things more and creates a push toward quality as opposed to raw quantity. And this is an argument for culture as well. When you start throwing subsidies in, people stop caring about anything because they have no skin in the game. The money's free. It's come from nowhere. Or it's come from government, it goes nowhere, it doesn't matter, you just spread it around and hope for the best. And I think that when I've looked at, subsidized housing and the people living in them here in this country, I see an awful lot of buying stuff that doesn't enhance value and gets thrown out very quickly. The old joke about America is it's the only place you can be impoverished and have a 65-inch TV set.
Yeah, true.
So with that, like you're kind of hinting at like Section 8 housing and all that, which they're trying to, relocate, historically underprivileged people to nicer neighborhoods and all that. I think a lot of that stems from guilt from segregation. Like here in Dallas, there was the Trinity River, which would flood a lot, and all of the black communities, they're segregated next to that river, so they're constantly being exposed to this nasty flood water, and a lot of people got really ill from it. But nowadays, just to kind of fix, the prior ills of, segregation, we tend to, I think we're overcompensating where, we have all these sections. And granted, it's not only, African Americans. There's, white people that are also in Section 8. But it's just, I feel like there's this lingering guilt we have from the past, and we're overcorrecting for it. Would you agree with that, Mr. Stevens?
Of course, the nature of egalitarianism is guilt. And what we're doing now is feel-good activities as opposed to looking at what people need. What we could do best for the poor is reduce their housing cost and give them safer streets and more functional institutions. Instead, we've gone the opposite direction by subsidizing them, and we've wasted trillions of dollars that we're not going to get back. We've neglected infrastructure during this time for diversity spending and anti-poverty spending, so that we've got a tremendous debt to the future, and nothing's really improved. I mean, people are still talking about how miserable they are and how terrible and racist the system is and yada, yada. So I think that, when I look at what we could do for people who have less, the answer is that directly subsidizing them probably actually sabotages them, because you're giving them money with no strings, with no ties, with no productive change. So it's going to just get frittered away, and they're not going to be any further toward what they need. In the meantime, they're living in dangerous areas. Our institutions are rotting and are less functional. And that actually, each one of those imposes not just cost, but risk to them. And I think that what we should do is eliminate those instead. I mean, if they can afford housing at a decent price, if their city is reasonably safe, if their institutions don't parasitize them with time requirements and red tape burdens, they're actually further ahead because they're going to have some kind of employment anyway. They're actually further ahead because what money they do have will go farther. And that is the only really meaningful long-term solution to poverty that we can have. But egalitarian societies are not driven by markets so much as they are by a market for ideology. That is, if you say things that are consistent with the revolutionary culture around you, with the egalitarian, altruistic, pacifistic culture, then you are rewarded socially. So we've created a situation where people are saying things they don't actually believe in for the reward of the herd, and then they are privately acting against that. And it's a very destructive loop. It's better, sort of back to the capitalism versus socialism debate, it's better to have a somewhat competitive society than it is to have an egalitarian one, because the competitive society at least rewards competence.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, the best thing we can do to help them is deregulation, abolishing minimum wage, removing red tape, and so on, making sure it is as humanly easy as possible to go out on a market and start to provide value. And I would argue that the fact that many of them have very little or nothing means they also have very little to lose, which means that they are able to take greater risks than a comfortable middle-class person in front of a computer at a anonymous global corporation who will try to sit there until he retires. And I think if we would have a free market with a minimum of rules, a minimum of taxes, that would actually help to have not more than, for instance, the middle class, who might actually risk being the loser in this kind of society.
That's very true. When we cut red tape, we enable people to act more easily and faster. And that means that if someone sees an opportunity and decides to start up his own business, he can get started very quickly without having all these things holding him back, or the risk of regulators coming in and finding him being a presence. I think of the guy, I knew a guy growing up, and I can't remember what happened, but I think he lost a job. There may have been some other chaos in his life, but he just started a business junk hauling. He would just take your stuff to the dump for a fee. That was his big idea. But he tapped into a really fertile market, because lots of people had stuff that needed to get hauled to the dump. They didn't have pickup trucks. They just wanted to pay someone a relatively small fee to just get rid of it. So he actually made a business and a decent life just hauling stuff to the junk and hauling junk to the dump. And this is stuff like old televisions and broken gear and that kind of thing. And it shows you the beauty of capitalism, which is that it finds needs and addresses them.
I can
go ahead.
Give you another beautiful example. Right now, I'm in a nature reserve fishing, and around here there are small villages, and there are two guys who are sort of local celebrities, because I doubt they did it consciously, but unconsciously they basically said no to society. So they have no bank account, no internet, nothing like that. So the way they earn a living is by doing small things, fixing stuff, plumbing, taking care of the people's summer houses here. And one guy, he has about $100,000 of fines for illegal fishing. And the authorities cannot do anything because he has no property. He lives, one of the summer guests whose house he's taking care of, he lives there, he fishes, he hunts, he picks mushroom berries, he sells that, obviously without paying any taxes. So they live their life the way they want to live their life. And what I think is so fascinating here is that the government has no way of coercing them, because they have no official property. All their income is sort of black, untaxed. So they come here from time to time and they talk sternly to them. They give them another fine, which adds to their total, and then they go home and they continue living the way they want to live.
That's interesting. We're seeing a huge black market here, not just for goods, but for labor, because lots of people are saying, you know what? Instead of paying all the taxes and insurance and various regulatory costs on this labor, I'd rather just sell it to you under the table for a lot less, make the money, and move on. And I think this government has taxed itself into oblivion. And at this point, people are fleeing any way they can. And the only people who really can't are the corporate serfs, because your income's reported. That's why it's good to be independent, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't have any illusions. I mean, I'm still dependent. If the government closes down my bank account, which it can, because we got proof of that in Canada and in many, many other countries, there's not much I can do. The only thing I can do is that I do have, of course, several bank accounts to minimize the damage, but still it would be a significant hit. So as I told you before, I'm reading Max Stirner's The Ego and Its Own, and he's actually talking a lot about this. Are you free in the liberal, and remember this was written in the 1800s. When I say liberal, think libertarian. Are you free in the libertarian state? And his answer is no, in fact you are not, because your rights are given to you by the state. And that means since they are given to you, they can be revoked. So unless you take your right and you make that right your property, something that has its basis in you, as these guys who don't have any official property, they do what they like. And since they are not using any of their given rights, there's nothing short of imprisoning them, which the state cannot do, because the crimes they do is working and not paying tax. And they cannot yet at least throw people into prison for that. So yeah, being independent gives you more freedom. At least it gives me total freedom from the corporation, the soul-sucking middle-class corporation. This is true, but I have no illusions that I am sort of more free when it comes to the relationship to the state than someone else who lives in the state.
You know, this is why America grew, I think, so strong, was that we were based on the natural rights idea of rights, as opposed to civil rights or human rights, which are basically the same thing. And that is that our Constitution forbids the government from seizing from us certain things we have in a state of nature. There is a social contract by which we give up the right to murder people. Very unfortunate, but has to be done. But other than that, things like freedom of speech, freedom of association, so forth and so on, those were not guaranteed by government, but government was guaranteed not to intervene. That only changed after our Civil War with the Civil Rights Act and the 14th Amendment, which then introduced government-created rights to America, and everything's been downhill ever since. So I think you have a really good point there. My take on it is just that bureaucracies are terribly inefficient. You know, the example from the news this week is the radioactive wasp nest at the nuclear waste storage site somewhere in the eastern United States, I think. And everyone's going, well, how could this happen? And I go, well, you know, we like to think that we write a rule and it's magically enforced, but really it depends on 400-pound bureaucrats to get their asses out there and to thoroughly inspect everything. And every time I've seen people, they go through a few little things and then they walk away. You know, their job is not there to be angels who get everything right. Their job is to do enough of their job that they don't get fired. And beyond that, they don't care. And so I think bureaucracies seem like a good answer because they write these strong rules and they have all these fines and all this stuff. But really, it depends on who's paying attention. And if the bureaucrats don't make it out to a location, or if they're feeling lazy that day, or if there's a sale at Penny's or something and they get distracted, you know, then it's not going to happen. And I like freer solutions. I think freedom's a false goal, but I like freer solutions because I think they're more realistic. And having people sort themselves makes sense to me, and you need culture to do that. You need some sort of set of shared goals and standards and aesthetics and behaviors and that kind of thing. And if you don't have that, you're going to be screwed either way. Unfortunately for government, it reduces culture. So we're doing exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, not from a freedom argument on my end, at least, but from a simple, this is how things function argument, from a realist argument, which is that at some point you have to accept that people are, to some degree, free agents, and they're going to do what works best for them. So you have to adjust your incentive structure instead of having more rules and enforcement, since those don't really work that well anyway.
Yeah, I agree. And with that said, I see that it's getting close to 6:30 here, so I probably need to start to wrap this up.
Yeah, and we kind of drifted away from technology and really wanted to get into how microplastics and all that are fucking us up genetically. Like it could possibly be decreasing our sperm counts and all that. And there's a lot of ills of, just unbridled technology that affects, we got into a lot of environmental aspects, but also our biological beings greatly affected by technology. And I think a lot of people skirt around the issue of overpopulation, but it is the main issue that we as a species are facing. It is the global issue that a lot of people avoid and addressing, and it's really just the deep ecologists who really address overpopulation. Like I know Mr. Stevens here is a great fan of Pentti Linkola, a great Finnish ecologist who said we need to drastically decrease our numbers for the good of nature. So that's one thing that a lot of the ecologists of today is more of just, I call it social ecology, which is also an official term, which encompasses things like ecofeminism and various other social types of approaches. Like you have your Greta Thunbergs and all that, who really aren't doing dick shit for the environment, but they make headlines. There's a lot of social posturing, like going to Gaza and all that. But where it comes to actual voices, we need to address the overpopulation issue. That is the most pressing issue that we as a species have, as well as the Earth itself. Do you guys agree?
Yeah. Yes and no, I would say. I believe that we will be able. Well, first of all, my main question there is, since this prediction of overpopulation and starvation has been made numerous times historically from the, I think, 1800s and onwards. So my first question there is, why would it be true this time and not any of the previous time? So I guess it's not a rejection, it's just a question. And the second question I have on that theme is that with the help of science and technology becoming more efficient, opening up new areas like the bottom of the sea for farming and extracting resources and so on, and then of course moving to the science fiction realm and looking to space for minerals and so on and so on. All of those things, what could that lead to? So I guess it was incorrect to say that I disagree. For me, it's an open question with lots of very interesting branches that could be explored.
Well, why overpopulation now? I mean, we can easily answer that. The population we have is the greatest we've ever had before. And you just look around, like Mr. Stevens was saying, that all the concrete jungles of major cities, we're just destroying the natural landscape all over the world. Like, and you have developing countries perhaps doing the most damage, but just in general, there's just too many fucking people, and a lot of people who don't really have much of a purpose in life. They just exist. That's it. And I understand, like, I'm really opening up some, sketchy takes, verging on eugenics and all that, but
no, please, no, this is another aspect that I forgot. So if what I was saying before was very pragmatic, looking at the science, how many can we be more, and so on. So this is the pragmatic side. What you just addressed is the value side, the subjective, the cultural side, and this is something. This is a completely different thing, and also enormously interesting.
Well, so have you ever seen like a whole bunch of feral cats together? Like sometimes in apartment complexes, people will just ditch their pets, and those feral cats, they just have like their own little community. But when you see like fucking 20 feral cats next to each other, you fucking hate cats. And the same with a shit ton of fucking people just aimlessly existing, and there's without purpose. It's just too much. And you mentioned emerging technologies. Yes, that could come to fruition where you have technologies that allow for 8-9 billion people to be on the planet without destroying the world. But that's just placing hope in something that's not here yet. So, Mr. Stevens, would you like to echo on that?
Well, the only thing I'd throw in here is just that since the days of Malthus, as the population has grown worldwide, we've seen certain factors get worse. More species have vanished, more microplastics, more pollution, possibly more cancers. Definitely, it seems, more Alzheimer's and dementia, which is apparently linked to particulate air pollution. And so I would say that, it's usual that we're getting tripped up by the Hollywood vision of collapse here. The Hollywood vision of collapse involves fire and sudden events and, everything exploding and people dancing around and stuff. But the reality is you just slowly slip into worse and worse states until finally you can't escape from this mess, and you've been dragged into the morass. And I think that's the type of slow collapse that happened to Rome, and it's the type of slow collapse that could happen to humanity, including through these environmental crises you mentioned.
All right. And on that note, let's wrap up. I want to thank you, Daniel, for joining today. Very insightful having your perspective from an anarcho-capitalist. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I really don't like labels, but I use them sometimes when I try to provoke people. But I doubt I managed to provoke you with that label.
Yeah, it's a fun. When you think about it, you get the anarcho in there, and we're glad that sort of. I think that's a good label to some degree, in that it captures that your perspective is not one of a pure business orientation. It's that you see capitalism as a path to human thriving.
Yes, it's a tool. It's not a god.
Excellent. And thank you, Mr. Stevens. I know you dropped for a little bit there, but it was great you were able to rebound and rejoin the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Enjoy as always.
Yes, and thank you for listening.